running through your own village at 4 a.m., through paths you memorized as a child, past doors of people who brought you soup when you were sick, 30 torches behind you, every face a face you knew. You don't get to be surprised. You saw this coming. What catches you is how fast your legs quit, how deep the snow gets in the dark, how quickly the Korean mountain you grew up on stops feeling like home, and then the headlights stop. A black car. A man in a city coat who has no business being on this road. He looks at you, this black girl on her hands and knees in the snow, and he makes a decision. What that decision started. What it cost 4 people who had no idea they were all connected. That's the part nobody saw coming. If you're new here, welcome to Afro-Korean Noir Stories. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now let's get into it. The torches came first. Amara saw them from her window. 1, then 5, then too many to count. Orange fire bleeding through the dark at the edge of the village. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She grabbed her coat and went out the back door. She'd been watching those torches build for 19 days. Not literal torches, not at first. It started as whispers, cold looks, doors that closed a little faster than they used to. The generator had been dead for 19 days. The village was burning candles and wood and patience. Every night, Elder Choi went to the shrine, put on his ceremonial mask, and spoke to the oracle in a disguised voice that echoed off the stone walls. And every night, the oracle said the same thing. The black girl brought this darkness. Her blood will end it. Amara had heard the oracle her whole life. She knew what it sounded like. She had never quite understood why Elder Choi's oracle always happened to agree with whatever Elder Choi needed. But she had learned, in 24 years on this mountain, to choose her battles carefully. Tonight, there was no battle left to choose. There were just torches and snow and the sound of her own breathing. She ran. She knew these woods better than anyone alive. Every path, every hollow, every place where the frozen stream ran close enough to the surface that a wrong step would send you through the ice. She had learned all of it as a child, not because someone taught her, but because the forest was the one place in the village where nobody looked at her and saw something that needed explaining. She crossed the frozen stream near the flat rock, the way she always did, where the ice was oldest and thickest. She pushed through the low branches at the northern ridge. She moved fast, but there were 30 of them, and the woman who had organized them knew this mountain too. Here is what Amara didn't know yet. Mrs. Yoon hadn't waited for Elder Choi to ask her twice. She'd gone door to door herself, calm, organized, specific. Come, bring a torch. It's time. She'd been waiting 20 years for a night like this, not because she was cruel, because grief, when it has nowhere to go for 2 decades, becomes something that looks for a door. Mrs. Park had cried as she ran. She'd loved Amara yesterday. Missed her. Han stood at his door and watched. He didn't run. He didn't stop it either. Amara had been afraid for 19 days. Now, running, she used the last of it. She ran for an hour. Her lungs started burning after the first 20 minutes. The cold came through her coat in layers. First the outside, then the lining, then her skin. Her legs got heavier with every step. She crossed the ridge. She pushed through the last of the trees. Her foot hit the road. Flat. Paved. A mountain road no villager ever used. It belonged to the world beyond the mountain, a world most of them had never seen. Her legs gave out. Both hands hit the snow. The cold shot up through her palms like electric current. She was on her knees in the middle of the road, breath coming in white clouds, and she looked up. Headlights. A black car, stopped completely. Engine still running, exhaust rising in the cold, pointed directly at her. It had been sitting there, in the middle of a road that should have been empty, before she arrived. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then the door opened. He was dressed for a city. Black coat, no hat, no scarf. Completely wrong for this mountain, this temperature, this darkness. Tall. He looked at the woman on the ground in front of his car, the way someone looks at something they cannot immediately place, not with pity, not with fear, with focus. He looked at her, then at the torchlight bleeding through the trees, getting closer. He looked back at her, and then he walked forward, reached down, and pulled her to her feet. "Get in the car," he said. She looked at him. This stranger. This man with no reason to be on this road. She looked at him for half a second and made the kind of decision that only becomes possible when every other option is already gone. She got in. The mob reached the road 30 seconds later. 30 villagers with torches stopped at the edge of the trees. They'd been running through snow and branches for an hour. Now they were standing on an open road, looking at a car none of them had ever seen. Long and black and expensive, sitting perfectly still, engine humming low. Mrs. Yoon was at the front. She was not a woman who frightened easily. 20 years of held grief had made her hard in the places other people stayed soft. She looked at the car. She looked at the man standing beside it. He had gotten back out. He stood between the mob and the car, hands at his sides, not moving, not raising his voice. Just looking at Mrs. Yoon the way you look at a problem you've already decided how to handle. Elder Choi was 3 rows back. He was always 3 rows back when something might go wrong. He recognized real danger the way a man who has spent 30 years manufacturing fake danger eventually learns to. He went very still. The man took 1 step forward. 1 step. The mob went silent as a graveyard. Something crossed Mrs. Yoon's face. Not fear exactly. It was the specific feeling of a person who has been completely certain about something for 20 years and is, for the first time, not certain. She looked at this man in his city coat. She looked at the 30 people behind her, and something about the distance between what she had organized and what was standing in front of her made the ground feel less solid than it had an hour ago. "The girl is under my protection," the man said. Quiet. Final. "Go home." Nobody moved. He looked at Mrs. Yoon directly. Only her. Like he understood, in one glance, exactly who had organized this and exactly what it had taken. She closed her mouth, and one by one, people started to turn around. Not because of the men still sitting in the car. They hadn't moved. Not because of any threat. Because this man, alone on a mountain road in the dark, was the most genuinely dangerous thing any of them had ever stood in front of. And they could feel it, the way you feel heat before you see fire. They went home. Elder Choi went with them. But as he walked, he was already planning. Already composing, in the back of his mind, the anonymous complaint he would send in the morning. He was good at those. The mountain road was solid ice. Ji-hoon's driver had gone off the edge, trying to navigate in the dark. Nobody was hurt, but the car wasn't going anywhere before dawn, and dawn was still hours away. Amara led them to her house. It was small. 1 room, a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs. The kind of space that looked exactly like the life of someone who had survived in a place that didn't fully belong to her. She built the fire without asking anyone to help. She found blankets. She boiled water over the stove. Her hands didn't shake. Ji-hoon sat near the stove and watched her. 3 of his men were in the corner, quiet, professional, watching their boss watch the woman. They had worked for him for years. They had never seen him look at anything quite like this. "You're not afraid," Ji-hoon said. She didn't look up. "I was afraid an hour ago. I used it all up." "Why were they chasing you?" "The generator broke 19 days ago." She poured hot water into a cup, dropped dried herbs in. "The elder told everyone it was my fault." "Was it?" She looked at him then. No aggression, just a clear, patient look. "Do you know how generators work?" "Yes." "Then you know it wasn't." He held her gaze. She handed him the cup. Hot water, bitter herbs, the smell of something that had been dried in the sun during a warmer season. He took it. He couldn't remember the last time someone handed him something without their hands shaking. Neither of them spoke for a while. The fire popped. Snow shifted somewhere on the roof. The 3 men in the corner looked at the floor. "What's your name?" Ji-hoon asked. "Amara." "What does it mean?" She looked at him again. Something in her expression moved, a small surprise, quickly covered by something softer. "Grace," she said. "Eternal grace." He looked at her. This woman who had run through snow for an hour and come out with steady hands and a steady voice. It fits, he said. Quiet. She looked away. That was the first thing between them. Neither of them named it. It was too early for names. Dawn came pink and cold over the mountain. A recovery vehicle would take 2 days to reach them. The road was still ice. Ji-hoon was staying. Word moved through the village the way news always moves through small places, faster than anyone planned, carried on the specific silence that falls when everyone is pretending not to look at the same thing. The men from the black car were at Amara's house. The car's owner was still here. Mrs. Park came first. She was a round woman in her 50s who had spent the night sitting at her kitchen table staring at the wall. 6 weeks ago, she had brought Amara soup during a fever. She had sat at the girl's bedside and talked about nothing for 2 hours because she could see Amara was lonely and sick. Last night, she had run through the snow with a torch in her hand. She couldn't put those two things together. She didn't try. She wrapped up some food, walked to Amara's door, set it down without knocking, and walked away without looking up. Ji-hoon saw her through the window. "Last night she was chasing you," he said. Amara picked up the food. "Last night someone told her to." She brought it inside. Her voice was flat. Not angry, just flat. The way a voice gets when it has processed something too heavy to carry with feeling. "Mrs. Salt Park taught me to make kimchi when I was 7. She's not a bad person. She's a frightened one." He watched her set the food on the table. He had spent 15 years in a world with one rule about this. You remember what people do, and you respond. This woman operated on completely different rules. He stayed to understand them. Then the door opened. No knock. A young woman, 22 years old, moving fast. She stopped when she saw Ji-hoon. Dark eyes, direct, not afraid. She looked at Amara. "Are you all right?" "I'm all right." The two women crossed the room and held each other, not dramatically, just firmly. The hold of two people who have chosen each other as family inside a world that doesn't fully belong to either of them. Hana. She stayed 2 hours. She and Amara spoke in the corner, shorthand, half sentences, the compressed language of a long friendship. Ji-hoon watched it and filed something away. When Hana left, she stopped at the door. She looked at Ji-hoon directly. No deference, no hesitation. "Thank you," she said, "for the road." He nodded once. The door closed. "Her mother was at the front of that mob," Ji-hoon said. He'd seen Mrs. Yoon. He saw everything. "Wasn't she?" Amara went still. "Hana doesn't know," she said, very quiet. "When she finds out, she'll have to carry something heavy." Amara looked at the closed door. "I'm not going to be the one who puts it on her." Ji-hoon looked at her. He didn't speak, but something shifted in the way he was sitting. The generator sat in the center of the village, like a rusted monument to 19 days of darkness. So Ji-hoon found it mid-morning and crouched in front of it the way he approached everything that needed to be understood. Completely still, taking it apart with his eyes before he touched it. Elder Choi materialized beside him. Small man. Sharp eyes behind a face trained to perform warmth. 70 years old, and he had run this village for 30 of them through a combination of things. Tradition, superstition, and the particular power of being the only one who could speak to the oracle. He smiled at Ji-hoon the way he smiled at everyone. Careful, deferential, already calculating. Ji-hoon examined the generator for 5 minutes. "Voltage regulator is gone," he said. "Fuel line is clogged. This has been building for 2 years." Elder Choi began an explanation. The oracle had warned of interference. There were spiritual dimensions to mechanical failure. "How long have you known?" The village had gathered. Quietly, the way villages gather when something is happening in the center. Elder Choi pivoted. Someone must have tampered with it. Perhaps Amara. "The oracle," Ji-hoon said, "is your voice. Through a mask. In a darkened room." Complete silence. Elder Choi's face went through 3 expressions, and then went still. Ji-hoon stood. He turned to the gathered families. He didn't raise his voice. The generator failed because it wasn't maintained, not because of any person, not because of any curse. He looked at Elder Choi one more time. "I'll have the parts brought up." He walked away. Amara had been watching from the edge of the crowd. She fell into step beside him as he passed. You didn't have to do that. I know. You're about to say, don't thank you. I fixed a generator. That's not something to be thanked for. Then what would be? He kept walking. He didn't answer. She watched him go. Behind them, Elder Choi stood in the village center, with every family looking at him. He smiled his careful smile. But inside, he was already composing a second message. Not to the oracle this time. To the government. It started with a child. Duri was 8 years old and had the specific courage of someone who had never been told often enough to be afraid. He walked up to Ji-hoon, the man who had made 30 villagers turn around with one step, and looked up at him without blinking. What does the black car run on? Ji-hoon looked at this child. He crouched down. Gasoline. What is gasoline? Refined petroleum, a fossil fuel. Duri blinked. What is petroleum? Ji-hoon glanced up. Amara was leaning against a fence 12 feet away, watching, trying very hard not to smile. Come with me, Ji-hoon said. He spent the next 3 hours in the village schoolroom, abandoned for 6 years, chalk dust on every surface, the old board still carrying fragments of lessons nobody finished. He drew the engine, the generator, the path from raw fuel to light. He explained each piece. He answered every question. He was not a gentle teacher. He was precise, technical, occasionally impatient. But Duri and the 11 other children who silently filed in after him were completely locked in. They had never heard anyone explain anything like this. Everything they knew came through Elder Choi. And Elder Choi explained everything as mystery, as spirit, as something only he could interpret. This man was explaining everything as something you could understand and fix with your own hands. Amara sat at the back of the room the entire time. She watched the most feared man in 3 countries crouch beside an 8-year-old to fix a diagram he'd drawn wrong. She watched him run out of chalk and accept a piece from a 7-year-old girl without breaking stride. She watched him work, and something happened in her expression that she didn't notice happening. Hana was at the back of the room, too. She noticed. After the children left, Duri came back. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. Will you come back? He asked. Ji-hoon looked at the child, at the chalkboard, at Amara standing in the doorway behind Duri. He told the truth. No. Duri thought about this seriously. Then he pointed at Amara. Can she teach us? She knows things, but Elder Choi told us not to listen to her. Ji-hoon looked at Amara, back at Duri. Start listening to her. Simple, final, like an instruction to one of his men. Duri nodded and left, satisfied. Ji-hoon and Amara looked at each other across the empty room. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. That night the village built a fire. Nobody formally invited Ji-hoon. But when he walked toward it, space opened for him. Quietly, naturally, the way space opens for someone the room has already decided belongs there. Mrs. Park brought extra food. She set it near Ji-hoon and didn't make eye contact. That was her apology. She didn't have words for it yet, but she had food. Han sat across the fire and nodded once. Respectfully? That nod carried several things he would never say. Duri was explaining gasoline to 3 other children in tremendous detail. Most of it was wrong. All of it was confident. Ji-hoon sat near Amara. The fire between them was low and orange. The snow in the trees caught the light and held it. They didn't speak for a long time. At the edge of the fire, Mrs. Yoon had come. She sat apart from the others. She was watching her daughter. Hana, laughing at something Amara said, leaning into her friend's shoulder. Mrs. Yoon's face was the face of a woman whose certainty had started to crack. She didn't know why. She didn't have a name for it yet. You're leaving tomorrow, Amara said. Day after, when the vehicle comes. Then Seoul. Then Seoul. She looked at the fire. So, I've never been to Seoul. You should go. I've never been anywhere. This mountain is all I know. This mountain, he said, just chased you through the snow. I know, she paused, but it's still mine. He looked at her then. The fire on her face, the snow in the trees above her, the stillness she carried, not coldness, not distance, depth. Like her reactions happened further down than most people's, in a place that took longer to reach, but held longer once you got there. They called you a blessing when things were good, he said, and a curse when things went wrong. She looked at the fire. That's what it means to be a symbol. You don't get to choose what you represent. You just get assigned it. What do you believe you are? She looked at him. And what she said was so simple and so complete that it landed differently than anything either of them had said yet. I believe I'm a person, not a symbol, not a blessing or a curse, just a person. He held her gaze across the fire. Yes, he said quietly. You are. Neither of them looked away. Across the fire, Mrs. Yoon watched her daughter reach over and take Amara's hand. And something in the older woman's chest cracked, very quietly, very deep, like the first fracture in old ice, so small you could almost miss it. Almost. The recovery vehicle didn't come alone. A government car arrived with it. Regional Inspector Wu stepped out and looked at the village the way a man looks at something he has already decided to acquire. He wasn't openly cruel. He was something more dangerous than cruel. He was ambitious, and he had learned to use legal language the way other men use fists. He had an anonymous complaint. He had authority. And he had something nobody in this village knew existed. A development plan for this specific mountain that had been running quietly for 6 years. Here is what that plan actually was. This mountain had protected indigenous heritage status. Commercial development on it was illegal. But Inspector Wu had been filing falsified heritage assessment reports for 3 years, suppressing that status one document at a time. He had a silent business partner who had been buying village land parcel by parcel, small amounts, quiet, the kind of transaction an overworked archivist might never notice. That silent partner was Elder Choi. For 6 years, Elder Choi had been selling land that belonged to the village to Wu's development scheme. Land that was never his to sell. And the anonymous complaint that brought Wu here? Elder Choi filed it himself. He had thought the inspector would help him regain control of the village. Instead, Wu had his own agenda, and the moment he stepped out of that government car, Elder Choi understood that he had let something in that he could not control. Wu spoke to Ji-hoon first. Carefully, respectfully, the way you speak to something you recognize as dangerous and are not yet ready to provoke. He spoke to Elder Choi second. Got the elder's version, Amara's fault, foreign national, civil unrest, the perfect legal frame. Then he found Amara. He placed a document in her hands, a formal notice of investigation into her residency status. She had no official documentation. The missionary doctor who brought her to this village as an infant had died 15 years ago. On paper, Amara did not exist. Wu intended to take her into custody pending investigation. In practice, that meant a government facility in the valley. In practice, that meant she never came back. Ji-hoon was standing 10 feet away when the document landed in her hands. He watched her face as she read it. Watched her go completely, absolutely still. Not afraid, not angry, just still. The stillness of someone who has learned, through a lifetime of practice, that showing either only gives the person in front of you more to work with. He stepped forward. She's under my protection. Wu looked at him carefully. With respect, that's not a legal designation. Get a lawyer. I'll wait. Wu held the look for a moment. He knew what Ji-hoon was. He also knew that pressing this today, without better information about why Ji-hoon was on this mountain, would be a mistake he couldn't take back. I'll return in 1 week, Wu said, with proper documentation requirements. He left. Amara looked at Ji-hoon. You keep doing that? Doing what? Staying, when you've got no reason to. I have a reason. She waited. He didn't say what it was. She didn't push him, but that night she was quieter, more careful. She moved through her house like someone who had just been reminded of the exact size of the world outside her window. Sergeant Park arrived after dark. He came with 6 men, 3 more than a check-in required. Ji-hoon noticed that immediately. He found his boss in the empty schoolroom. standing in front of the chalkboard, looking at the diagrams. Park looked at the diagrams, at the village through the window, at Amara sitting outside with Duri, showing the boys something in a book, their heads bent together in the lamplight. He reported. Professional. Correct. Things in Seoul needed attention. The organization wasn't running itself. Ji-hoon told him 3 days. After the inspector situation was resolved, Park left. Ji-hoon watched him go and held something in his mind. A small specific thing he'd seen in Park's eyes that didn't match the professional voice. He filed it. He'd come back to it. What he didn't know yet was that Park had already been to see Inspector Woo. Before arriving at the village, Park had made a stop. He'd given Woo very specific, and very legally useful information about Amara, her lack of documentation, her origins, her precise vulnerability, framed as a formal complaint from a concerned citizen. The language was not a citizen's language. It was the language of someone who knew exactly how to file a government complaint. Park needed Ji-hoon back in Seoul. A government inspector removing Amara was the cleanest way to do it without a direct confrontation. Here is what Park was actually protecting. For 8 months, he'd been skimming from Ji-hoon's organization. Small amounts, calculated to stay below the line of casual notice. He was paying a debt to Chairman Oh Se-jun, a rival syndicate leader who had leverage over Park from a mistake 3 years back. To keep Oh quiet, Park had been feeding him intelligence about Ji-hoon's operations. Small information, carefully chosen, enough to satisfy without being enough to destroy. A Ji-hoon distracted by a woman on a mountain was a Ji-hoon who wasn't watching the books. Park needed the distraction to end. Not for loyalty, for cover. What Park had not calculated was that Ji-hoon had already started looking at the books. The next morning, Amara was different. Ji-hoon found her at the well, the bucket already in the water, her back to him. Something changed, he said. Nothing changed. Last night something changed. She turned. The well was stone, old and dark, frost on the lip of it. She looked at him across it. Your man came, she said. The one with the quiet eyes. He looked at me the way people look at problems. She pulled the bucket up. He reminded me of what you are, what your world looks like. And I live on a mountain. I'm Ji-hoon. You live in Seoul. You're leaving in 3 days. She held the bucket at her side. I'm not a complication you brought with you from the city. I'm a person who lives here. I know that. Do you? Silence. She picked up the bucket and walked back toward the village. He stood at the well and watched her go, and something in his chest pulled in a direction he didn't have a name for. Hana found out from Mr. Han. He didn't mean to tell her. He was an old man carrying guilt that had been getting heavier every day since the night of the chase. Hana asked him a direct question. Who went door to door? Who organized it? And he was too tired and too ashamed to lie to her face. Hana stood very still when he told her. Then she walked to her mother's house. The conversation was not loud. Mrs. Yoon didn't deny it. Why, she had known this conversation was coming, and had been half prepared, and half not prepared at all. She looked at her daughter and told the truth. The missionary doctor. The resources that ran out before they reached her husband. The fever that took him when Hana was 2 years old. The infant girl the doctor had brought to the village. Watching that girl grow up in a village her husband should have been alive to see. 20 years of grief that never fully closed. Because Elder Choi had always been there. Subtle, patient, never directly, making sure the wound stayed open. Reminding Mrs. Yoon, at precisely the right moments, what she'd lost, and who had been present when she lost it. Hana listened to all of it. Then she said, 3 years ago, I fell through the ice on the stream. Mrs. Yoon went still. You told me a neighbor pulled me out. You said you never found out who. Hana. It was Amara. She pulled me out of the water and carried me home and sat with me through the fever. She never told anyone, because she knew you didn't want to owe her anything. The silence that followed was the loudest Mrs. Yoon had ever sat in. She saved my life, Mama. Hana's voice was flat, not angry, worse than angry. And you led the chase. Mrs. Yoon sat down, not dramatically, just down. Like the weight of 20 years had finally become the actual weight of 20 years, and her legs simply couldn't argue with it anymore. She went to Amara's door the next morning, before sunrise, before anyone was watching. She stood on the step for a long time. When Amara opened the door, Mrs. Yoon didn't speak. There were no words built for this. The case she'd been constructing for 2 decades had turned to ash. She had nothing left but herself on a step in front of the woman she'd organized 30 people to chase through the snow. She sat down on the step. Amara looked at her for a long moment. At the grief still visible in her face. Real grief, real loss. The kind that doesn't stop being real just because it was aimed at the wrong person. Amara sat down beside her. They sat in the cold morning air and said nothing at all. The village was beginning to stir. Smoke from chimneys, the creak of frozen wood, a child's voice somewhere in the distance. 2 women on a step, not forgiving and not fighting, just sitting. When Mrs. Yoon rose to leave, she didn't look back. Amara stayed on the step a little longer. Ji-hoon had seen it from a distance. He didn't approach. He understood what had just happened. He let her have it. Ji-hoon had been asking questions for 2 days. Not obviously, one villager at a time, casually. The way a man who has spent 15 years finding what people hide has learned to ask things without looking like he's asking. He asked about the generator fund, the maintenance money every family contributed each year, the oracle ceremonies, the land. One conversation became another. An older couple told him about a land parcel they'd signed over 6 years ago. Elder Choi had said it was for a government resettlement fund. Another family, another parcel. Always small, always framed as something official, something beneficial, something Elder Choi was managing on their behalf. Ji-hoon traced it. He had people who could trace things fast. He brought Inspector Woo to the village center in the morning. Every family present, every face. He laid out 2 sets of records. The generator fund, 12 years of small diversions, monthly, consistent. The maintenance money that should have replaced parts 3 times over, redirected quietly into Elder Choi's accounts. And the land records, 6 years of parcel sales. Village land sold to a development company with a silent partner, whose name appeared in the government filings if you knew exactly where to look. Elder Choi stood in the center of it all and tried one more time. The oracle, tradition, outsiders who didn't understand mountain ways. Nobody looked at the shrine. Mrs. Park spoke first. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You told us to chase her," she said. Not to Ji-hoon, just to Elder Choi, the man she had trusted with everything her whole life. "You stood in that room with your mask, and you told us the oracle demanded her blood." Elder Choi opened his mouth. "And all along," Mrs. Park said, "you were taking our money and selling our land." She looked at Amara, standing at the edge of the crowd, and her face broke open, the specific breaking of a person who understands what they were part of and cannot undo it. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice cracked on it. "I'm so sorry." Mr. Han sat down in the snow and put his face in his hands. One by one, the village turned. Not dramatically, quietly. The way people turn when they finally understand what they were used for and have to decide, in real time, what to do with that understanding. Elder Choi was removed from his position by the village itself. No order from Ji-hoon. No government decree. 30 families who had lived under his management for decades simply decided, together and without needing to vote, that he was finished. He went quietly, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever done. With Elder Choi's records visible, everything became clear. The mountain land had protected heritage status. Every parcel sold to Woo's development scheme was legally protected from commercial development. The scheme was built on 3 years of falsified reports, official documents with Woo's signature, submitted to the Regional Heritage Authority to suppress the land's protected status. Ji-hoon had contacts, people who knew which units were building cases against which officials. The Environmental Heritage Protection Unit had been investigating Woo for 2 years. They had the falsified reports. They were missing the land transaction records that would complete the chain. Ji-hoon provided them. Then he sat down with Inspector Wu privately. He didn't do it publicly. He didn't need to humiliate the man. He simply laid out what existed, what had been provided, what would happen next. The girl stays, Ji-hoon said. Her status gets resolved through proper legal channels. I'll provide what's needed for that. The development plan ends. What happens between you and the Heritage Unit is between you and them. I have no interest in accelerating that conversation unless you give me a reason. Wu looked at the man across from him and understood, with the particular clarity that comes from a very tight corner, that he had no moves left. He left the mountain. He didn't come back. Ji-hoon called Park back to the mountain. Park came alone. He walked into the schoolroom and found Ji-hoon sitting at one of the small children's desks, a phone in his hand, financial records on the screen. Park looked at the records. He looked at his boss. He understood, without a word, that the conversation was already over. He didn't deny anything. He told Ji-hoon everything. Oh Se-jun's leverage, the mistake 3 years back, the debt payments, the intelligence he'd fed in exchange for Oh keeping quiet. He told Ji-hoon that a boss who loses himself in a mountain village over a woman is a boss who stops watching his organization. He told Ji-hoon he'd been doing what was necessary. Ji-hoon let him finish. While you were protecting the organization, Ji-hoon said, Oh made 2 moves against it. Because you told him I wasn't watching. Park said nothing. The money comes back, every amount, every month. And? Park's voice was flat. He already knew. You're not Sergeant Park anymore, Ji-hoon said. You're nothing. Park was walked to the car by 2 of Ji-hoon's men. He didn't fight it. He walked the way a man walks when a secret he's been carrying for 8 months has finally been set down, exhausted, and, despite everything, slightly lighter. Ji-hoon stood alone in the schoolroom after the car left. He looked at the chalkboard. Duri's questions still there. Petroleum, voltage, how far underground. He looked at the diagrams he had drawn. Chairman Oh Se-jun was in Seoul. He had made 2 moves while Ji-hoon was on this mountain. There would need to be a reckoning, careful, complete, on Ji-hoon's own terms. Another confrontation, another story waiting in the dark. But first, the generator parts had arrived. Ji-hoon fixed the generator in front of half the village. Not alone. He walked 3 village men through every step. What he touched, why he touched it, what each piece did, and what happened when it failed. So that the next time something went wrong, the answer would not be an oracle. It would be 3 men who understood the machine. Duri was there. He asked 37 questions. Ji-hoon answered all 37. 2 hours of work. Cold hands, cold metal, the smell of fuel and frost. Hana watching from nearby. Mrs. Park with her arms folded, nervous. Mr. Han standing straight, like he was witnessing something important. The generator coughed once, coughed again, caught. The lights came on across the village, all at once, warm and yellow. Every window suddenly lit up against the dark. The sound that came from the children was something between a scream and a cheer. Pure, uncontrolled. The sound of 20 days of cold and darkness, ending in a single second. Mrs. Park put her hands over her face and cried. Mr. Hain laughed, surprised out of himself, the real kind, the kind that arrives before you can decide whether to have it. Duri stood with his fists raised above his head like he had personally fixed the machine. Amara was standing beside Ji-hoon when the lights came on. She looked at her village, every house lit, every window warm, the children running between the lights like it was a game. She looked at all of it, the place that had chased her, that had apologized in small, quiet ways, how that had just held its own elder accountable for the first time in 30 years. And her face was so open and unguarded that Ji-hoon felt like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to see. He looked anyway. The school needs a teacher, Amara said. You can teach them. I can teach them what I know, but they need the world outside this mountain. I'll send someone, a real teacher. Books, materials, whatever the school needs. She looked at him. Why? Because Duri told me he was going to dig for gasoline. He paused. Someone needs to arrive before he destroys the well. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a small one. A real laugh. Surprised out of her. Genuine. Unguarded. The kind that comes when something lands in exactly the right place, at exactly the right moment. He heard it and understood, for the first time, what had been happening for 4 days. The last wall came down, quietly, without his permission. His car was repaired. His men were ready. Sol was waiting. He found Amara at the edge of the forest, the same tree line she had run through 4 nights ago. She was standing with her hands in her pockets, looking at the trees. Not afraid of them, just looking. "You're leaving," she said. "Yes." "When?" "This afternoon." She nodded. She kept her eyes on the trees. "Ji-hoon, what is this? What were these 4 days?" He was quiet. "I need to know," she said. "I live here. I'm not going anywhere. And you're leaving this afternoon, back to a world I don't understand." She finally turned to look at him. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you to be honest with me before you go." He turned to face her. "I don't know what to call it," he said. The most honest thing he had said to anyone in longer than he could measure. "I've never had it before." "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." She looked at him. "Are you coming back?" The wind moved through the trees. Snow shifted off a branch somewhere above them and fell in a small soft rush. "Yes," he said, like it surprised him, like he hadn't known it was true until it was already out of his mouth and hanging in the cold air between them. "Why?" He looked at her. The woman who had run through snow for an hour and come out with steady hands. Who had sat in silence with the woman who organized her destruction and hadn't sent her away. Who had laughed at him teaching a child about gasoline and made him feel, for the first time in longer than he could count, so like a person rather than a position. "Because you're here," he said, "and since the moment you got into my car, I haven't been able to stop thinking about that." She held his gaze for a long moment. "I'm not going to change who I am because of who you are." "I know. And I'm not going to pretend your world doesn't exist." "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" He took one step toward her. "I'm asking if I can come back," he said. She looked at him. This man who had stepped out of a black car in a dark forest and stood between her and 30 torches without being asked. Who sat at a village fire like he had nowhere else on earth to be. Who told her she was a person, just a person, like it was the most obvious thing anyone had ever said. "Yes," she said. The black car sat on the mountain road. His men were ready. The whole village had come out. Not to watch exactly, just to be present. The way a village is present for things that matter. Duri stood at the front with his arms crossed, personally supervising the departure. Ji-hoon walked through the village one last time. He stopped at Duri. "Don't dig for gasoline." "I know." Duri said it with enormous dignity. "It exists in underground deposits. Extraction requires specialized equipment and significant capital investment." Ji-hoon looked at this child for a long moment. "Good," he said. He kept walking. He reached Amara at the edge of the road where the village ended and the mountain began. His men were at the car. Mrs. Park had her hands folded together. Mr. Han was looking at the sky. Hannah stood at her mother's side. Mrs. Yoon was there too, at the back of the gathered people, smaller than she had been 4 nights ago, standing differently. Hannah reached over and took her mother's hand without looking at her. Mrs. Yoon held it. Ji-hoon reached out. Slowly. Deliberate. The way he did everything. His hand came up to Amara's face. She looked up at him. The snow had started again. Light. Early morning snow, catching in her hair and on her eyelashes and on the shoulders of her coat. He kissed her. Gentle first. Then certain. The same certainty he brought to every decision he'd ever made. Like this was simply where he'd been moving since the moment he saw her on her hands and knees in the snow in front of his headlights and reached down, without thinking, and pulled her to her feet. She kissed him back. Behind them, Suduri made a sound of profound and personal disgust. Mrs. Park made a sound of complete and total satisfaction. Mr. Han studied the sky, which had become very interesting. When they separated, Ji-hoon kept his hand against her face for one moment longer. He looked at her. Her eyes, her steadiness, the small smile beginning at the corner of her mouth. And something in him settled. Like something that had been in motion for a very long time had finally, quietly, stopped. "I'll send the teacher first," he said. "Then I'll come." "In that order?" Duri needs someone to correct his petroleum theories before they become permanent. She smiled, full and real and unguarded. He held it, the way you hold something you finally understand you were missing. He got in the car. The black car moved down the mountain road, through the trees, growing smaller. Amara watched it until it was gone. The village lights were on behind her. Duri appeared at her elbow. He looked at the road. He looked at her face. "Is he coming back?" "Yes." "Good," Duri said. "I have more questions about petroleum, and about whether the stream could generate electricity instead of the machine. And about... Duri." "Yes?" "One question at a time." He considered this. "Fine. Petroleum first." She laughed. She looked at the empty road. In the city below, far from this mountain, Chairman Oh Sejun was making his third move. That reckoning was coming. It hadn't started yet. It was waiting in the dark the way all serious things wait. Patient, inevitable, building. But right now, the village lights were on. Right now, a small boy was explaining the petroleum extraction industry to anyone within earshot. Right now, the snow was falling gently on a mountain that had almost destroyed something rare, and had, at the last moment, chosen differently. The Korean Mafia boss was going home. The girl who had been chased through the snow was still exactly who she had always been. And the light stayed on. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit the like button. It helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And drop a comment telling me which character stayed with you longest. I read every single one. See you in the next story.